to Szabocast. Here we discuss all things from a working class, trans, anarchist, analytical perspective. Due to the nature of this show, listener discretion is advised. My name is Skylar, my pronouns are she, they, they, and I'm your host. Thank you for joining us today.
On this episode of Szabocast, we're going to be talking about the Democratic Party. More specifically, what is it going to take for me to ever vote for the Democratic Party again? Now, before the 2024 presidential election, I have always been pretty skeptical of the Democratic Party. I've been a pretty prominent opponent to Joseph Biden, and of course, during the Obama administration, I've been pretty critical of him as well. And I think that this can stem back to even before those last two Democratic presidents, to even Bill Clinton, and so on and so forth. My main and overall criticism of this party is that they always concede to the Republicans' agenda, even when they outwardly say that they don't want to. They don't have any leverage against the Republicans. They can't keep the Republicans in check, and that's why the Republicans presently are boldly willing to embrace an ethno-nationalist, hyper-fascist, white supremacist administration. Because of the fact that the Republicans are so fascist, they have not ever been put into check. They've never been held accountable for their actions, if ever at all. And even the display of the multiple attempts to impeach Donald Trump or to criminally convict Donald Trump, the fact of the matter is that we live under a capitalist system where Donald Trump can very much, in fact, get his ass out of prison if he wanted to, in which he did, and now he's the president of the United States for the second time in a row. This tells me that the Democratic Party are very much not taking the threat of fascism seriously, or even the fact that we're presently here in a fascist regime. They're not taking that very seriously. And given that most of the politicians that are in the Democratic Party who are in Congress, they do support Israel, like unabashedly so, like Chuck Schumer. They are not even equipped, let alone probably not even willing, to meaningfully address that we are in a fascist nation state. Even in the presidential race, where Donald Trump's opponent was Democratic candidate Kamala Harris, she was willing to call Donald Trump a fascist, but was unable to meaningfully address some of the key issues that Donald Trump was willing to threaten the American people on, including immigration, the massive influx of anti-transgender laws and bills being introduced into legislation, the overturn of Roe v. Wade. She was not able to meaningfully address or even confront any of these issues, and I've already done a video on this very topic already, so I won't repeat too much of that here. However, this episode is going to address one specific topic. Will I ever vote for the Democratic Party again? And I'm just going to tell you right off the bat, as it stands right now, no. I will never, ever, ever vote for the Democratic Party again. This does not mean I'm siding with the Republicans. This does not mean I'm switching ideologies towards the right. I am making this statement as a leftist, somebody who is more far left than any of the liberals who were hawking at me, guilt-tripping me about voting for Kamala Harris, even though she never had my back or any of our backs to begin with. At this rate, the way that the Democratic Party is, I would much rather vote for a fired bullet going towards both of these political parties instead of voting for either of these fucking parties. That said, what will it take for me to ever vote for the Democratic Party again? I'm going to try to keep my mind a little open here, because I'm pretty firmly against even the idea of voting for the Democratic Party. I think voting for the Democratic Party is more harm than good, even with the context that the opposition is a Republican. And let me explain why. Every 4 years, we're given this presidential election, and both of these parties either do horrible things or they do nothing at all to make things better. Can you figure out which one is which? The Republicans make things worse, and the Democrats don't do anything to fix it. Meanwhile, the rest of the world exists outside of electoral politics. There's lots of organizing to be done at a grassroots, local, and direct level. People need homes. People need resources. People need supplies, food, and means to be able to get back on their feet, to be able to put food on the table, to support their families, to be able to have a chance at success. So the Democratic Party can only do one thing in all of this. They can promise that they are not the Republican Party. And every time I hear this line of reasoning, I say the same thing. Well, I'm also not the Republican Party. I'm also not Donald Trump. I'm also not the alt-right. You want to know who else is none of those things? Almost everybody fucking else in the world. Being not the Republican Party, not Donald Trump, not the GOP, not Project 2025, is not qualifying enough for you to get an electoral vote. What that essentially means is that you are saying that you either vote for the Democratic Party or you be on the receiving end of state violence. In other words, it is a hostage situation, and the Democratic Party are doing a horrible job at maintaining an illusion that there is such a thing as a democracy under this plutocratic fucking empire. You see, Democrats don't introduce policies. The Republicans do. This is why, admittedly, and which is really sad about this, is that Republicans get more leverage because they do introduce policies. They introduce shitty ones that hurt the working class, and they use capitalist-run propaganda to manipulate the working class into voting against their own best interest. So no, I won't be voting for the Democratic Party. I'm not gonna fucking do that. Especially in the way that it currently exists today, I'm not a fucking pushover. Threatening the Republicans to win the election and then to also introduce no meaningful policies to combat anything the Republicans are doing is coercion. Flatly. Plainly so. No questions, if, ands, or buts. It is coercion and a form of state-funded violence. Even on the concept of harm reduction, meaning you vote for the Democrats, therefore you get 4 years of less bad shit. Take a look at what happened in the last Democratic administration with Joseph Biden. We entered a goddamn genocide. Roe versus Wade was overturned. Hundreds upon hundreds of anti-transgender legislations were introduced. Not only were police given more funding under Joseph Biden than even Donald Trump's previous administration, but the construction of Cop City in Atlanta, Georgia, as well as the several other ones across the entire country, took place. And against the will of the people, no less. Deforestations took place, on top of the fact that people, particularly protesters of these cop cities, were disappearing and getting arrested inside of their homes without warrants. And this is where the lib will tell me, okay, but Biden's not perfect, but Trump is way worse. Okay, what's any of your fucking goons in your goddamn Democratic Party doing to stop Trump? Do you not understand where I'm coming at here? They don't keep that fucking orange man in check. No. They just embrace his fascist ideologies. It's so fascinating that these liberals, especially liberal voters, are so progressive and so left-wing, kind of. But then, when it comes to the people in which they're platforming for on their campaigns and whatnot, it's always the most embarrassed Republicans that are just wearing blue and sporting a donkey on their badges or something. This isn't to say that the Democratic Party and the Republicans are one and the same. I've made that analogy too, and I don't agree with it anymore. But that is to say that the Democratic Party is just as evil as the Republican Party, because the Democratic Party are complicit in the actions of the Republican Party. So, what is it gonna take for me to vote for the Democratic Party? Well, I've been hearing that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has been flirting with the idea of running for president. And you know what? That's an interesting take here. Because This is not something I have ever predicted. Although Bernie Sanders is the most likable one out of all of them, Bernie Sanders also himself has limitations. And I think Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez also maintains those limitations. So let's pretend, hypothetically, because who knows what the future's gonna hold anyway, what if Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez does run for president? What if she's on the ballot? What if she's the primary to go up against Donald John Trump? And this is, of course, assuming that Donald John Trump doesn't just cancel elections and, stays in office for 5 fucking terms until he dies or something. Alright. Let's start itemizing things. First of all, if I'm going to vote for the Democratic Party, I want to see a plan. A whole ass plan. I don't want promises that you're just not Donald Trump. I don't want you to threaten me that if I don't vote for you, that Donald Trump's going to be the president again. You are insulting my intelligence if you are going to do that. If I prepare dinner, right, and I drop a hot dog on the floor, and put it into a hot dog bun and present it to you. And I make sure that you are aware that this hot dog has been on the floor, right? Maybe we'll even use the 5-second rule, right? And then I present to you a heaping plate of shit that I had just taken right now. And I present these to you, right? And I say, listen, this hot dog is not great. It probably has some bacteria on it and some pretty nasty fungus on it. But that's infinitely better than eating a heaping pile of shit, getting, E. coli for fuck's sake, and maybe vomiting, having to go to the hospital, right? So clearly, you would eat this hot dog, because this hot dog is at least edible. It's something you've probably eaten before. You can probably, cover it up with some ketchup and mustard and relish. It's good as new. Just ignore all of the hair and the crumbs and the fungus that came from the floor. You would look at me like I was a fucking idiot. You'd excuse yourself and probably head out of my house thinking that I was threatening you with something, right? Of course you would. That's not a choice. Either a fucking disgusting hot dog or a heaping pile of shit. There's no choice in that. Don't eat either one. And you know why you're not going to eat either one? Not just because they're both gross, but because you have standards, right? You're not going to be so desperate that you're going to eat a nasty ass fucking hot dog as opposed to eating a heaping pile of shit. So Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez needs to not only establish a plan, but she needs to run on this platform that she's not just not Donald Trump. She needs to be more than just not Donald Trump. Because if that's what's qualifying her for president, then you may as well just vote for me. Vote for me. I'm not Donald Trump either. My roommate's not Donald Trump. My cat is not Donald Trump. My mother is not Donald Trump. We're all not Donald Trump. You listening to this podcast, I'm pretty fucking sure you're not Donald Trump. You could run for president. Why don't you go do that? I mean, hey, why the fuck not at this point? You're not Donald Trump. You're clearly qualified. See how, condescending I come off? Because that's how idiotic and condescending the Democratic Party's platform is when they run on the merit that they themselves are not Donald Trump. It's insulting. It's actually extremely condescending. And more importantly, it tells us, especially me, that they're not taking any of the typical struggles that the working class in the United States go through on a regular basis. It just truly, and I mean truly, needs to fucking stop. It needed to stop a long time ago, but it needs to stop now. The second point that I want to make as to what will get me to vote for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or any other Democratic Party candidate is that they need to not only have a plan, but they also need to threaten the Republican Party and the general right wing. Now, I don't mean literal physical violence. I don't mean that. Now, I know that would be awesome. That is what I would like. I want that. Straight up. I want that, and I'm just gonna say it up front, I super want that. But I know they're not gonna do that. Like, they're just not. They're too fucking cowardly to do that. But what I can wish for is that they are threatening the Republican agenda. This means they have to acknowledge Project 2025, and they have to have an agenda that specifically dismantles Project 2025. Now, I know that Project 2025 is just a series of policies that work to dismantle the government, meaning any work that the Democratic Party is going to have to do is going to have to reconstruct the government. And of course, we're going to have to talk about that later. But what I'm trying to say is that we need policies that prevent Christian nationalists from taking over our country. You see, Christian nationalists like to use the separation of church and state to their advantage, meaning any time that the Christian nationalists are held accountable for their evil lobbying actions, they can hide behind the separation of church and state and the First Amendment, and they get a free pass to just be fascist and override policies. It's hypocritical, I know, but if we're going to reconstruct anything of our quote-unquote democracy, because let's be real here, it's never been a democracy here. Let's not lie to ourselves about that. At least create some kind of checks and balance within your nation state. I'll even go further and say that you need to criticize and attack them for being Christian. Not necessarily on the principle that they are Christian, but you need to make it clear that this is a Christian movement, that this is a movement that wants to maintain Christian supremacy, and that it needs to stop now. Your plan needs to include stopping Christian fascism. You need to also not be afraid of the attacks from Christians that are saying things like, oh, you're attacking Christians, therefore you're attacking freedom of speech. Christians don't give two shits about freedom of speech. I mean, their whole religion is literally anti-free speech. I'm a former Christian. I've studied the Christian religion as a former Christian. I know what Christianity is, and it is fundamentally, at its core, not in favor of freedom of speech. The Christian religion, at its core, is about submission to God and the will of Jesus Christ. And sure, you can talk about progressive Christians until the cows come home, but Christian anarchists or Christian communists are not the ones who drafted Project 2025, though they are Christian. And we need to acknowledge that and stop hiding behind any kind of decorum. One last thing I want to say before I move on from this specific point is that using scripture against Christians is not going to work either. They believe that Jesus himself is too liberal. If you use the scripture or the teachings of Jesus, you're going to get laughed at in your face. That's not going to work. You'll be seen as too weak. You'll be seen as too woke. And people will just not take you seriously. And actually, this follows into my next point. Don't concede to the goddamn Republicans. Don't try to appeal to Republicans. Don't try to win the hearts of the Republican Party, okay? Let me just put this into plain words that maybe you can understand. Anybody who is considered a moderate Republican or somebody who is a Republican but doesn't like Donald Trump, they're gonna vote with either way at this point. They're going to vote for either Donald Trump or you. And honestly, trying to tap into that's not going to work. Because truthfully speaking, not a whole lot of people fall into that target demographic. Most of these people voted for Donald Trump. Plainly so. The last administration and the vice president of the last administration tried to do that, and they lost the election. Meanwhile, the Democratic Party's actual voter base, while they were gaslighting the rest of us, normal human beings, while their administration's leader were committing a fucking genocide, none of us were listened to. None of us were consulted. You need to reach out to people at a grassroots level, and you need to speak to them. You need to hear what the working class has to say. Don't get some token, okay? Like Donald Trump got a token, and it's Sean O'Brien from Teamsters unions. And look how well that turned out for the working class who are on the receiving end of all of these tariffs. And despite Donald Trump tokenizing the Teamsters union, Donald Trump was buddies with Elon Musk. He still is, basically, but he's severing ties with him currently. But Elon Musk is one of, if not the most brutal anti-union CEO out there. I mean, Donald Trump even applauded Elon Musk for cracking down on the unions of Tesla. So don't do that, okay? Don't tokenize anybody. Don't say, I've got Sean Fain from the United Auto Workers Union. No, speak to the American people. And you want to know something? You know what will give you extra points? Speak to undocumented immigrants. Talk to them. I'm serious. If you speak to undocumented immigrants and you hear their grievances, what they have to go through, you're going to win points for that as well. Because here's the thing, they can't even vote for you. Yet, they are on the receiving end of all of these ICE raids that have been going on lately. And if Kamala Harris won the election, they would have been deported anyway, because that's what Kamala Harris was pushing for, mass deportations. Kamala Harris was even trying to claim that she was going to outflank Donald Trump on mass deportations, which is outright disgraceful. So if you're speaking to undocumented immigrants and you go on this platform, you're going to stand out like a sore thumb, but you're going to be the alternative that people have been waiting for, because then you're going to be representing the working class, like plainly so. Undocumented immigrants are not capable of owning property in the United States. They're not able to be a capitalist overlord. They're not able to be a part of the ruling class. They're not capable of doing that. No, they are only able to be working class people who are on constant threat of mass deportation and having their families separated. And we also have to recognize as well that these people are in our country right now because our country has imperialized the entirety of Latin America, with our country using our taxpayer dollars to overthrow Latin American democratically elected presidents and politicians, and to replace them with U.S.-appointed dictators like Augusto Pinochet or Jorge Ubico. This is to say that any intervention from the United States into any other country usually leads to imperialism. And that's another point I'm going to make here. You need to be boldly anti-imperialist. Now, I know that this is a scary word for a lot of people within the administration. Anti-imperialist, how are we going to do anything ever? Okay, well, your current president, Donald Trump, just did tariffs, and you can't fucking do anything about it. The cost of eggs are skyrocketing, and the economy is destroyed. That's with the nationalism of the phrase America First. That's with the nationalism of Make America Great Again. And that's with the nationalism of these very horribly implemented tariffs that are giving the working class a big middle finger. So what does imperialism do for the United States anyway? Well, it gives us more resources. We steal resources from other countries. We steal and outsource labor into other countries like Bangladesh and so on and so forth. And sure, it does make us a wealthier country, but it also gives a lot of suffering across the entire world. And is that really blood that you want to have on your hands, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez? No, I don't think so. I already have a very cynical view of the Democratic Party. And even though Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez presents herself as somebody with a conscience, I don't believe that, and I don't buy that. This is your chance to prove me wrong. Being an anti-imperialist means that you recognize that the reason why 9/11 happened is because the United States intervened in the Middle East for goddamn 50 years prior to that. I mean, look what happened to Iran in the 50s. Look what happened to Afghanistan in the fucking 70s and 80s. Look what happened to Iraq throughout the invasion in 2003 for 20 fucking years. You know what came of that? ISIS came of that. Anytime we get ourselves involved in the Middle East, specifically, it doesn't even matter what part of the Middle East. You can even say Israel, for example. We get our asses bit in the end. Because our taxpayer dollars go to that. We are further radicalizing people who want to spill our blood. And of course, as much as I don't ever want to see something like October 7th or 9/11 from happening ever again, the truth of the matter is that as long as the United States or even any imperialist nation gets themselves involved with eradicating entire democracies, installing fascist dictatorships, going around the world and extracting resources from countries which we have no right sticking our fingers into, completely destabilizing these otherwise very wonderful places to be at. I mean, if you look at any pictures of like Iraq, for example, in the 70s and before, you're gonna find photos of women actually going to schools and attending seminars and congregating with each other and not having to cover up, because anytime you get any kind of destabilization over there, like with what happened in Iran when the Shah ran for like 20 fucking years. In 1976, they finally overthrew that guy, and the only opposition left was Ayatollah Khomeini, whom he was such a far right-wing radical Islamist that even the very act of holding hands or singing or reading would get you the fucking death penalty. So yeah, you need to be an anti-imperialist if you're not only just going to get my vote, but if you're going to be taken seriously as a presidential candidate to contend against Donald Trump. And this is another point that I want to get to here, and that is you need to be an anti-capitalist. Now, what do I mean by this? Does that mean you just can't have any money at all? Does that mean you gotta empty your wallet and just have no assets at all whatsoever? No, that's not what I'm talking about here. Let's talk a little bit what it means to be an anti-capitalist within the United States. First of all, being an anti-capitalist does not mean that you can't just have things, okay? Being a capitalist does not make you somebody who produces things. Like Elon Musk, he doesn't produce anything. I stand corrected. He produced tweets. That's what he produces. That's what he does. He's the richest man in the world, not because he produces things, but because his daddy was a plantation owner in South Africa during apartheid. And you need to recognize that all of these super, hyper, powerful, plutocratic people who routinely lobby several politicians, like how Elon Musk lobbied with Donald Trump, those guys are routinely going to override any kind of democracy. Even if it's not Donald Trump's face, it's gonna be anybody else after Donald Trump. Mike Johnson is much younger than Donald Trump. He might be your opponent if Donald Trump kicks the can one day because of how old he is. I mean, I don't know that for sure. I'm literally just speculating here. But you need to recognize that the goods that you have, like, say, your very fancy laptop, if you've got one, those things were created by the working class. Even if it's part of an assembly line, even if the factory owner is a capitalist, and it's not like a worker co-op or anything like that, it means to say that owning a laptop, for example, or an iPod or something like that, does not mean that you can't be an anti-capitalist. These are personal properties, whereas private property is like the analogy of the factory. Those are the means in which you can produce, the means of production. Yeah, we're getting Marxist here, my friends. So then what does it mean to be an anti-capitalist if we're understanding this context? Well, it means that Brian Thompson, hypothetically, because I know he's no longer with us, he can't own an entire fucking insurance company where 32% of all of the people in which it covers get denial letters. It means recognizing that the police already have as much surveillance as they humanly fucking can, and that they don't deserve another goddamn cent. It means that all of the anti-regulatory policies that are put in place are not there because the Republicans are the ones who champion the virtue and value of freedom, but because the Republicans don't want any regulations getting in the way of corporations profiting because they cut corners and pollute the environment and step on workers' rights. You need to recognize that the Democratic Party, as it stands right now, is not going to be your friend. They're not going to support you getting in the way of their APAC money. I'm sorry, you just need to be an anti-capitalist. People are fucking fed up with the way things are. Say what you will about the currently defunct United Soviet Socialist Republic, but you cannot deny that the private ownership of the means of production, where the wealthy elites have the majority of the ability to produce goods and services, to be able to control our media to a monopoly, to be able to have the police around their pinky. This is not working for the working class. The working class is struggling, and you can no longer deny that we are in need of real change. Not Obama change here, not Joe Biden change. We need change. And lastly, and this is going to be my biggest point here, you need to not be a reformist. You need to be an abolitionist. Okay? We need to recognize that the so-called nationalist intoxication here of this idea that America is great and wonderful and that we need to maintain this nation state in order to be a global superpower to keep all of these other countries in check. No, we need to fucking stop that right now. For example, the United States does not deserve to be on the Security Council, especially that right now it is endorsing and sending money to a genocide. We don't deserve to be on the Security Council at all. The United States is not some great superpower other than the fact that it maintains coercion and violence on the rest of the entire fucking world. No, you do need to be an abolitionist because people are fucking sick of having their intelligence insulted. Think about when Donald Trump uses inflammatory rhetoric to hurt undocumented immigrants. Think about that. He uses nationalist language. He uses phrases that bolster the American image in an emotional way to try to trick voters into thinking that the undocumented immigrants are the problem. No, it's not the undocumented immigrants. It's the fact that the United States completely, throughout the last 100 years, decimated Latin America. And that's why people are coming to the United States, because they have nowhere else to go. Truthfully speaking, we are responsible for the reason why there's an influx of immigrants coming into the country from the southern border. We're our own worst enemy here. We need to abolish the United States empire. And I'm sorry if that's like too much for, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and all of her liberal ass fucking friends, but you need to recognize that the United States is a means to an end. It's been almost 250 years since this country was founded. This is an empire, and empires must fall. And if that means you are going to be the one to dismantle this country in a way that bolsters the power and longevity of the working class people, then by all means fucking pull that trigger. Because your other option, my liberal ass friends, is to just let Donald Trump be the one to destroy this country like Bad and Bonata wants to happen. No, instead, you can give a fuck. Give a fuck, you know what I mean? Give a flying fuck about the longevity of the people. Stop pretending that we are gonna just do anything you want us to do just because the other person is Donald Trump. If the other person is Donald Trump, you need to do everything in your fucking power to oppose Donald Trump. Not just not be Donald Trump. You want to know who's not Donald Trump? Luigi Mangione. And you want to know something? I'll just fucking say it right now. He did the best fucking thing that I've seen in a long fucking time. Luigi Mangione did the actual right thing. He killed a capitalist who put millions of Americans into suffering and death. He did the right fucking thing. Fuck it, okay? If Luigi Mangione was fucking running for president, I'd vote for him. I'd vote for him so fast. I would enthusiastically be telling my followers to go vote for him right now. Because he actually did something. He did a thing, okay? And I just want to make it clear, I have zero faith in Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I think she's full of shit. I genuinely do. I think Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, if she runs, and if she even makes it to the primary, she's gonna fucking lose. And if she does win, she's gonna fucking, throw her whole administration into the fucking trash, just like Joe Biden and just like Barack Obama did. No, you need to be an abolitionist. You need to be an anti-capitalist. You need to be an anti-imperialist. You need to put some fucking standards into this government. But I'm not going to hold my breath to that. Instead, I'm going to continue organizing, I'm going to continue getting involved locally, and I'm going to continue getting involved directly. But for now, my friends, I am not voting for the Democratic Party. And I don't fucking think that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or anybody else who plans to, run against Donald Trump for that matter, is going to take any of what I have to say seriously. I don't even think that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez will even listen to this podcast. I know she goes on Hasanabi's podcast and live streams on Twitch and all that sometimes. And I know that she sometimes goes on live streams with Tim Walz and plays Crazy Taxi for some weird reason. But I don't think she's even going to be listening to this. She's too important. She's too bourgeois. She's too upper class. I'm just a fucking ant to her, okay? I'm just a fucking peasant. She's not going to listen to this. Are you fucking kidding me? I'd like to actually see her address these points that I made. I'd like to see that. That actually make me fucking listen to her for once. But no, I don't take her seriously. I'm not going to take her seriously. At least until she, has a goddamn spine. Unlike the rest of her fucking cowardly ass party. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast today. I'm Skylar Szabo. This is Szabo Cast. You can listen to this podcast on YouTube and Spotify. I also have my main channel, Turbo Queer. I've got my music on Szabo Cat Records YouTube channel. You should go check all that out. There's multiple albums and songs and stuff to check out. And I've also got my gaming channel on Injection Fairy Lily on YouTube. Fairy with a F-A-E, not F-A-I in there. So just go ahead and look for that. And that's about it. Until the next episode, take care, and I wish you the best solidarity forever.